Imagine for a second stepping into the heart of a bustling, completely impenetrable corporate headquarters.
Oh, yeah, like just intense energy everywhere.
Exactly. I mean, it's massive, right?
Huh.
It's a port enclave. It's constantly evolving, just relentlessly tearing down the old stuff to build the new,
All that forward momentum.
right? All forward momentum in international commerce.
Mhm.
And that is Havana. But then, you take a drive, you leave that concrete intensity behind, and you step out into a sprawling, lush countryside retreat.
It's a completely different vibe.
It really is. The air completely changes and the pace just drops entirely.
Yeah.
And as you look around at the intricately paved streets and these untouched colonial mansions, you realize this beautiful retreat is actually a perfectly frozen architectural time capsule.
Which is wild when you think about it.
Right. And it only exists because it suffered a massive, catastrophic economic collapse.
Yeah, it is the ultimate urban paradox, really.
I mean, we usually associate perfectly preserved historical sites with centuries of careful maintenance, right? Like
Yeah.
endless funding.
Exactly. But here we have a city that basically locked its aesthetic identity into the mid-19th century precisely because the money just vanished overnight.
Yeah, and that is exactly why we are doing a deep dive into Trinidad today.
The architectural soul of colonial Cuba.
You got it. The mission today is to explore how this one single city managed to freeze time. We're going to see how it transformed from this epicenter of unimaginable wealth into a phantom town, and then eventually into a globally recognized masterpiece.
It's quite a journey.
It really is. And to understand how this happened, we have to start with the actual dirt beneath the city's foundation. Trinidad isn't just, another colonial settlement stamped onto a coastline.
No, definitely not. Its geography was really its ultimate destiny.
Yeah, let's get into that because, it's situated in a very specific way.
Right. Well, you really cannot separate Trinidad from its topography. It is nestled perfectly between the Caribbean Sea and the Escambray Mountains.
Those mountains are gorgeous, too.
They are.
Yeah.
And it borders the San Luis Valley, which is historically one of the island's most vibrant and fertile regions. So you have this incredible geographical diversity packed into a relatively tight space.
Like beaches and coastal caves, right?
Yeah, beaches, caves, and river systems, too. Like the Agabama River, which actually carries legends dating back well before the Spanish even arrived.
Oh, really?
Yeah, going all the way back to pre-Hispanic indigenous populations.
That's amazing. And the historical gravity of that specific shoreline is just massive. I was reading that Hernan Cortés actually anchored his ships right near the town before crossing the Gulf for the conquest of Mexico.
Yeah, it was a super vital staging ground because of its natural resources and the protected harbor.
But despite that early prominence in the 16th and 17th centuries, the city didn't exactly experience a steady linear growth.
Did it? No, not at all. For over 2 centuries, the region basically sat in this deep colonial lethargy.
Right. It was sleepy, relatively isolated, just very culturally insulated.
Exactly. But then in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, it practically detonated.
It just exploded, right?
Yeah.
Because it woke up to a rapidly industrializing global market.
Yeah. The world had developed an absolutely insatiable appetite for 2 main crops. First, coffee, and then primarily sugarcane.
Sugar was basically the 19th century equivalent of crude oil, right?
Oh, 100%. It was a high-yield, high-demand commodity that completely dictated global trade policies, and Trinidad was uniquely positioned to cultivate it.
Because of that San Luis Valley.
Right. The valley provided this incredibly fertile soil, and the nearby port gave them immediate access to international shipping lanes. So the influx of wealth was just staggering.
Okay, let's unpack this because to truly understand the architectural marvels of Trinidad, we have to confront exactly how those marvels were funded.
We do. It's a crucial part of the story.
Right. We are looking at these historical accounts, and it is impossible to talk about the sweeping prosperity of this sugar boom without acknowledging the reality of its engine. Impartially speaking, the texts are clear. This incredible economic opulence was built directly brick by brick on the misery and human degradation of enslaved Africans.
Yeah, there's really no separating the two.
Right. I mean, many of the town's most stunning structures, like the grandest palaces, trace their direct lineage to these vast sugar estates operating out in the valley.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the 19th century global economic booms were intrinsically tied to profound human exploitation.
Yeah, that was the engine of the era.
It was. The demand for cheap sugar created this localized environment of immense cruelty operating in tandem with immense luxury.
Like the wealthy landowners importing marble from Italy and fine ceramics from Europe.
Exactly. While the individuals actually generating that wealth were subjected to brutal, grueling labor in the cane fields.
It creates a really challenging dynamic for anyone studying the city's patrimony today. I mean, you walk into these lavish estates and you have to simultaneously acknowledge the aesthetic mastery of the craftsmanship and the horrific human cost that funded every single stone and archway and mahogany door.
It definitely raises an important question about how we engage with fraught historical spaces.
Because the preservation of Trinidad doesn't erase that brutal history, right?
Right, it actually cements it in physical form. These buildings serve a dual purpose now. They are spectacular examples of colonial refinement, sure, but they also stand as enduring monuments to the enslaved people whose forced labor quite literally shaped the city.
So you study the aesthetic art, but you are constantly forced to interrogate the brutal economics of how that art came to be.
You really can't separate the creation from the conditions of its making.
No, you really can't. So, okay, by the early 19th century, we have this booming city. They're building these massive ornate estates, essentially just printing money with sugarcane.
Just unbelievable amounts of wealth.
Right. But then the narrative takes a really sharp, unforgiving turn. The very geography that made Trinidad so rich suddenly became the exact reason for its abrupt downfall.
It is such a dramatic shift.
Yeah, by the 1830s, Trinidad basically hit an absolute wall.
A total economic halt. The city just went into this severe urban retreat and recession.
Which is especially striking when you compare it to Havana, right? Because Havana's economic boom was just hitting its stride, and they would continue rapidly modernizing the capital for decades.
Right. Havana kept growing, but Trinidad just completely stopped.
Now, you would think a city generating that much capital would just pivot to a new industry, or at least innovate its way out of the slump. But based on the sources, my understanding is they literally just ran out of dirt.
They literally did. It really comes down to the agricultural mechanics of sugarcane itself.
It's a demanding crop.
Remarkably demanding. It voraciously strips the soil of nitrogen and essential nutrients.
Oh, so it just ruins the land.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah.
In the 19th century, without any modern synthetic fertilizers, the only way to maintain your profit margins was to constantly and aggressively expand into fresh, uncultivated land.
So it was essentially a slash-and-burn expansion model.
Exactly. You exhaust a field, you abandon it, and you just clear the next one.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because that geographical diversity we talked about earlier suddenly became a trap.
It completely bucks them in.
Right. I like to think of it like an analogy. Trinidad was like a rapidly growing plant that completely outgrew its pot.
Oh, I like that.
And instead of repotting it, the investors just uprooted everything and moved to a bigger garden, leaving the original pot to basically gather dust for over a century.
That's spot on. They couldn't push their plantation south into the Caribbean Sea, obviously.
Right, water gets in the way.
Yeah, and they couldn't plant massive sugar fields up the steep, rocky slopes of the Escambray Mountains. They had basically consumed the entire fertile bowl of the San Luis Valley, and there was simply nowhere left to go.
So capital is essentially like water then. It just follows the path of least resistance.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it. Capital is inherently mobile, and its loyalty only goes as far as the profit margins.
So when the soil was exhausted, the wealth that didn't stick around to figure out a new economic model, it just flowed over the mountains.
Yep, when the uncultivated land ran out, the vast majority of the capital, along with the wealthy families and the enslaved populations, simply emigrated.
Where did they go?
They moved to regions where new settlements were being actively encouraged and land was abundant. Places like Cienfuegos or Sabula Grande. Trinidad was practically drained of its lifeblood almost overnight.
The accounts of the time actually call it a quote-unquote phantom city. You have to picture the jarring transition for the people who stayed.
It must have been surreal.
Yeah, one decade, you are the shining epicenter of global wealth, hosting European dignitaries and trading millions in sugar. And the next decade, you are literally a ghost town.
Just deserted streets.
Deserted streets, palaces left in deplorable decay, just the wind blowing through empty courtyards.
It really highlights the immense fragility of single-resource economies. When the sugar engine stalled, Trinidad had absolutely no secondary industry.
No manufacturing base?
Right, no alternative agricultural staple to fall back on. The city basically just ceased functioning as a hub of commerce.
But that catastrophic economic collapse is the exact reason the city is famous today.
Which is the great irony of Trinidad.
Because the money evaporated so abruptly. The 20th century never truly arrived there. The push for modernization, the bulldozers tearing down colonial buildings to make way for high-rises and pavement, none of that happened because There was literally no money to fund it.
Poverty perfectly preserved the past.
Exactly. If Trinidad had found a way to continue prospering, if it had grown like Havana did,
Yeah.
it would look completely different today.
Oh, yeah, the original 18th and 19th century structures would have been knocked down, built over, and modernized right out of existence.
Instead, economic abandonment acted as this incredible protective shell.
It's fascinating how that works.
So let's walk through that protected shell for a bit.
Yeah.
If you head to the quote-unquote high part of the city, the areas climbing up toward the foothills of the Escambray Mountains, you are met with twisted, stone-paved streets, massive historic squares, and sprawling parks.
It's so visually striking.
And the architecture dominating these spaces is broadly split into two main styles, right? Cuban colonial Baroque and neoclassical.
Yeah, you see these styles most prominently in the massive private residences that actually survived the Exodus.
Let's talk about the Baroque style first.
Sure, specifically the palaces belonging to the Counts of the Burnett House and the Iznaga family.
Now, European Baroque is known for being ornate and highly detailed.
It is, but the Cuban colonial adaptation takes it a step further to actually deal with the climate.
How so?
Well, it features dramatic sweeping arches, intricate wrought iron grills, and these massive, heavy wooden doors. It was designed to be visually overwhelming, but also functional.
And then contrasting with that, you have the palace of the Cantero family, which exemplifies the neoclassical style.
Right, neoclassicism is far more restrained.
Yeah, it values symmetry,
Yeah.
massive columns, and clean lines, drawing really heavily on classical Roman and Greek antiquity.
But rather than imported marble, they often utilize local limestone.
Right. And today, these massive private residences have been turned into museums. They really stand as towering symbols of the power, the luxury, and the intense social signaling that characterized their first owners.
Oh, they were deliberately intimidating. These estates were built to physically manifest the immense, unimaginable wealth of the sugar barons for literally anyone walking down those cobblestone streets.
Wait, I do have a question about the layout of this wealth, though, because looking at the sources, there seems to be a glaring omission here.
Oh, what's that?
When we think of vital, massively wealthy colonial cities in the Caribbean, we almost always associate them with massive military forts.
Oh, right, of course.
Like Havana has its legendary fortifications like El Morro. San Juan in Puerto Rico is famous for its massive defensive walls.
Sure.
But Trinidad has zero impressive military constructions. They completely prioritize religious buildings, churches, convents, and these massive private mansions. Did they really just feel completely insulated by the mountains and the sea? Like, why leave millions of dollars of sugar wealth totally undefended?
That is a great observation. It actually speaks to the fundamental difference in how these cities functioned within the broader Spanish colonial ecosystem.
Okay, how so?
Havana was the imperial vault. It was the primary port where the extracted wealth of the Americas was basically stored before being shipped in massive, heavily armed armadas back to Spain.
Because it held the king's wealth.
Exactly. Because it held the king's wealth, it had to be heavily fortified by the Spanish crown against rival empires and pirates. Trinidad, however, generated a highly localized private wealth.
Ah, so they were spending their own money, not the crown's money.
Precisely. The capital in Trinidad was tied to the land and the local elite rather than the imperial military apparatus.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, while the difficult terrain did offer a natural buffer, the lack of forts really comes down to priorities. These families invested their personal wealth in social and religious signaling like mansions and grand churches rather than military defense.
Because they were building for legacy and comfort and local status, not for imperial warfare. That distinction really changes how you view the skyline. So let's zoom in a bit closer. Beyond the grand categories of Baroque or neoclassical, what does it actually feel like to walk through these spaces? Because this architecture is brilliantly adapted to the realities of a harsh tropical climate, right?
Oh, absolutely. The residences are all built around these massive interior patios and lush courtyards.
And the courtyard is basically the central lung of the colonial Cuban home.
It is. You access these inner sanctuaries through deep galleries or long rows of heavy stone arches.
And those aren't just aesthetic choices, right? They're highly functional.
Very functional. By forcing air to travel through shaded stone galleries before entering the living spaces, they were actively cooling the air.
And there is a very specific wooden element that plays a huge role in this thermodynamic design. The Zulgadizes.
Zulgadizes, yeah.
Which are these elaborate wooden overhangs covered by heavy Spanish roof tiles.
Right. The Zulgadizes act as a vital buffer zone. In the Caribbean, you are basically dealing with two extremes: blistering direct sunlight and torrential downpours. So the Zulgadizes extend the roofline far past the exterior walls. They provide deep, continuous shade, preventing the sun from ever hitting the exterior walls and heating up the house.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah, and they also allow the windows to remain open for ventilation even during a massive rainstorm. They create these cool transitional spaces between the hot sun of the courtyard and the deep interior of the home.
And the visual landscape this creates is just spectacular. I mean, if you look at Trinidad from above, from the foothills, red is the absolutely dominating color. You just see this vast sea of red-peaked and flat roof tiles stretching out across the city, just baking in the Caribbean sun.
But that intense expanse of red terracotta is constantly disrupted by bursts of life.
The courtyard's right.
Yeah, the interior patios are overflowing with green flora vines and flowers that spill out over the walls, bringing freshness and deep shadows along the squares and parks.
It sounds so beautiful.
What's fascinating here is how the physical architecture eventually dictated the culture of the city itself.
Oh, really? How did it do that?
Well, during the decades of economic abandonment, a very specific atmosphere settled over Trinidad. The sources describe it as a slow rhythm of truce and evocation.
A slow rhythm of truce and evocation.
Wow. Yeah, it wasn't just the physical preservation of bricks and wooden eaves. The very pace of life slowed down to match the buildings.
That enforced isolation basically created a cultural time capsule that sat largely unnoticed for decades.
It really did. But eventually, that perfectly preserved atmosphere became its greatest asset. In relatively recent decades, modern economic, social, and cultural interests, quote-unquote, discovered the city again.
They realized what a treasure had been left behind in the dust.
They did. And that rediscovery brought new, carefully managed economic investments focused on restoration rather than modernization.
So they didn't bulldoze it this time.
Exactly. It revitalized the legacy of the colonial past without destroying its footprint. And it ultimately earned the city the highest possible honor, being declared a Patrimony of Humanity by UNESCO.
So what does this all mean? I want you listening to this right now to imagine stepping away from your intensely fast-paced, scream-filled, relentlessly modern life.
Just leaving it all behind.
Yeah. You walk off a plane, you take a drive into the Cuban countryside, and you step into one of these courtyards. The very air feels different. The deep shadows cast by the stone arches, the scent of the green flowers contrasting with the hot red roof tiles. The architecture itself forces you to slow down to a 19th century rhythm.
It is a physical space that literally demands you change your internal clock.
It is an enforced tranquility, and the irony is that this deep peace was born from a highly chaotic, violently exploitative, and frenetic boom and bust history.
The paradox of Trinidad.
Yeah. To briefly recap the incredible arc of this deep dive, Trinidad went from being a booming, highly exploitative sugar powerhouse to an abandoned phantom city choked off by the limitations of its own geography.
And then to a resurrected architectural masterpiece defined by its red roofs and green courtyard.
It is a trajectory that defies all standard urban development models. It is quite literally a city saved by its own devastating economic failure.
It really is.
And that brings up a really provocative thought to leave you with. This entire exploration hinges on the concept of preservation by neglect.
Right, the idea that doing nothing saved it.
Exactly. Trinidad's status as a priceless architectural time capsule was caused entirely by a catastrophic 19th century economic recession that drove all the modernization away. Which makes you wonder what economically failed or completely forgotten towns in our modern world right now are being accidentally preserved.
That's a fascinating question.
Right. What bypassed Rust Belt city or emptied out desert town or abandoned industrial port is sitting quietly right now just gathering dust, waiting to become the celebrated, perfectly frozen UNESCO Heritage Site of the 22nd century?
It completely reframes how we look at economic stagnation. I mean, sometimes being left behind is the only way a place can survive intact.
The next time you find yourself wanting to escape to a lush countryside retreat away from the bustling corporate headquarters of modern life, remember Trinidad. Sometimes the most beautiful, enduring time capsules are forged in the exact places the world decided to walk away from.